I've been conducting almost 20 years because I started very young, but of course professionally conducting about 13 years. And I come from playing violin, playing piano, but also studying composition. So I was always interested in new music because I was myself writing, and that's still a passion for me. And I think that influences my view on older music as well, because I see it in the context of new music, and I see new music in the context of old music, and the connection between new compositions and old music, and the opposite. First time that I worked with Orchestre de Paris was a cancellation, so I was called about a week, 2 weeks before, and it was a wonderful experience, both conducting in the wonderful Salle Pleyel, and also we did together Berlioz extracts from Romeo and Juliet, so it's a piece that I love, and obviously the orchestra really knows it. So it was a wonderful thing to do a French piece with a French orchestra that really knows how to play it and doesn't play it too heavy, and understands the humor in it and the colors in it. I enjoy working with Orchestre de Paris each time because it's wonderful string section with very individual players in it, which I love usually working with, because a lot of orchestras there is a sense that the leaders are leading and the section is kind of behind, and it's a kind of not very interesting. But what really makes a good orchestra is actually the back of the section in the strings, and I feel that's really strong with this orchestra. And also they are very comfortable about working about details, listening. They listen really well to each other, and also they are open to new ideas. So for example, with the Berlioz, it wasn't like I came there and they were not prepared to do anything different from what they used to. It's a very open and open to new ideas, open to try new things, and so that's great for a conductor. Even when you do the program, until you actually go to the concert and actually perform it or hear it, you don't really know how the pieces will influence each other or give you ideas from one to the other. So there's always a kind of searching, a kind of a journey that one has for the player, but especially for the listeners, to hear the different pieces in different contexts. It's like going to a gallery where you have a Rembrandt next to a Picasso. Suddenly things change. Suddenly you see that there is a lot of connections, that the actual style of the piece is less important than the deeper meaning, the inner meaning of the piece and the work of art. So that's why I find it always interesting. In this case, it's very unusual connection of three composers that seem to be completely not related, and so every piece will throw something on another piece that you will hear. You will suddenly hear in the Saint-Saëns ideas and colors that Takemitsu explored years after, and Janacek, you will hear a kind of amazing orchestration that in some way you can even hear sometimes in the Takemitsu. So it's an interesting combination. We decided to have two pieces by Janacek, which are not so played often these days. So the famous Sinfonietta and the Fiddler's Child, which is a symphonic poem by Janacek. And actually it's beautiful to hear them side by side because they really complement each other and they work well together as a set, as a group. And the first half we have, of course, the Saint-Saëns concerto with Aldo Cicciolini, and then the first piece is Takemitsu orchestral piece. So the idea about the Takemitsu was, for me, I love his music, and I always was interested in his music, and for me it works very well with Janacek, actually, because both are not true modernists. They look back a lot. They look back at the romantic music. In the case of Janacek, at romantic music, at folk music. In the case of Takemitsu, at French music. And so that's why there is an interesting connection with Saint-Saëns, because obviously Takemitsu's greatest influence was always French music. It wasn't the composer of modern music which I knew or liked the most when I started listening to new music, from the age of 13, 15. And so gradually I'm more and more interested in his music. Also because I'm now a bit less interested in a kind of more the most revolutionary figures, which I of course love and still conduct, but I'm also interested in composers that were doing not necessarily revolutionary things, but doing things in very much their own unique way, going through their own path and continuing on it. You know, if you look at Takemitsu's work, it's almost 50 years of really his own things, you know, without too much influence from the outside. Janacek was in Czech Republic and that's it, you know, Brno and Prague, and he was traveling very little. He also started to compose very late. So for me, it was also interesting, you know, to think about that. How come, you know, most of his great pieces came very late in his life, you know, because before he was 40, there are no real great pieces. All the pieces are quite traditional. So he kind of went through a transformation, which was also part of the whole era, you know, from 1885 and 1890. You see that in Sibelius, in Stravinsky, in Debussy, in Ravel, all these composers went a kind of transformation to modernism, gradual transformation. And his journey is particularly interesting. And because his background is very vocal, also the orchestral music is very much to do with vocal lines and text. So it's almost like underneath these instrumental lines in Fiddler's Child or Sinfonietta, there is a hidden text which is not sung or not spoken. And he used to go around villages and towns and also countryside and write, copy tunes of if somebody was saying something, then he would copy that. So a lot of the music is very connected to the Czech language and the rhythms of the Czech language. In that way, it's very similar to Bartók. But in a, again, very unique way. You would, you know, go to a shop and suddenly hear a lady saying something, and then would copy that and would copy that rhythm and would really use it in his pieces. And that's why you have a lot of very unusual rhythms in his work. Janacek, Fiddler's Child, is a really superb piece, very unusual. Structurally, it's very fragmented and very original. Audience find it a difficult piece because it's really in a structure that no other piece is in. It's a completely structure for that piece only. And that was very normal for Janacek. He really invented new structures for each piece and for each opera. So he was always searching for that. And this piece is based on a folk story to do with dying baby. And his father, who was a violinist, who calls him from heaven. So it's a very dark piece in many ways, but also very ethereal because you've got this violin, very high violin, that seems to want to seduce the child. And of course it ends in tragedy. You have the viola section, which is divided into 4 parts. Which is the most unusual part, really. 4 parts, very big solos, and they represent the kind of the poverty of the village where the dying baby is at. So it also kind of describes a scene of poverty and hunger, and a terrible situation that exists there. And there is also a ruler of the village who has authority and power over everybody. That's also that's a theme and fragmented theme that's also changing through the piece. So but you can actually follow the idea of the story or the sum of the story with the violin line, because the solo violin part is really almost like a concerto, an amazing orchestration with the viola section, with the percussion, with suddenly the triangle. So it's beautiful piece, and quite challenging to perform because very few orchestras have it in their repertoire. So it's usually, when I conduct it, it's a new piece for the orchestra, and it's kind of a shock for the violas when they realize that they are playing alone most of it, and so it's quite a challenge usually.